Hey guys, Stealth here and welcome back to a deck review. This deck review is on a deck that Amorphous Zigzag sent in. Earlier today I released a video that showed you what gameplay he had, and that was with this deck. I'm going to base my suggestions / recommendations on this deck on what he was playing there, which was Tough Jungle. That was the map. If you play a different map, you're going to need a different form of an airborne deck. Some heavily favor more ground-based conflicts, using BMD-3s for example. Some of them will favor more use of helicopters. In the case of Tough Jungle, I would say more use of helicopters, because that way you have that mobility that on a map like that is very important, either to help out your allies or to make sure that your units arrive in ambush positions or early land grabs. Alright, for starters, what I'm not seeing here is a airborne command units. Helicopter-borne, Mi-8, Mi-8TV, even K-29 works. It's very fast, the K-29. It's faster than the Mi-8 by 20 kilometers. And it comes with rocket pods and those autocannons. The reason why I would want to have one of these is to ensure that in the situation that he was in during the gameplay, he could sneak a CV through a forest and capture a spawn zone on the other sector, on the other side of that forest. So making sure that you have a command unit would be very useful. In order to get that one in, I would sacrifice one of the Mi-26s. So let's say, well, since you got so many different helos, these are good with their 80mm rocket pods. These, however, are potentially better because they got 122mm rocket pods. They do more damage. Now, don't fly over the forest and drop off your CV on the other side. Just have the CV escorted by Spetsnaz and VDV, and then walk him into the command sector as I was describing it. There's also two Mi-26s. These are sort of a mobile fob, but they are really expensive at doing that. They're 110 points, and you only get the two. I would not pick these. I would pick the Mi-6. It is smaller, it carries not as much, but you get 3 of them, so the loss of 1 isn't as crippling as it would be with the Mi-26. Also, the Mi-26 I found is pretty slow to land. It takes a while for this thing to touch down. And all that time, the enemy could be attacking it. Alright, infantry. Depending on what you want to do, you're going to have more motorized / light mechanized / airborne vehicles. For what he was doing, I understand his choice of VDV-90 in the BTRs. I just wouldn't go with maximum number of elites, because I'm seeing 27 VDV, 18 Spetsnaz, Conquerors, and Gorno. I'm not seeing any anti-air. So I'm going to completely overhaul this section. And I'm going to say I want to have one card of VDV-90 in the BMD-3, 13 of those. Why? Well, at some point he was poking out of a forest and there were a bunch of Mistral launchers, VLRA Mistral spotted, that he just couldn't quite reach out to and kill. The VDV-90 would be able to go through the forest, and the BMD-3 with the Conqueror's M or the autocannon potentially could have wiped those out. So for 50 points you can bring in these guys. They're not great for a meat grinder though. They simply don't have the firepower for that. So I would also have one in the BTRD. This way you have 26 units of VDV. Then for further, let's say, forest fighting, bring a card of Spetsnaz in the BTRD. The other options are, well, the other options could work. A Skrejet, for example, could be useful in order to suppress enemy infantry so that the Spetsnaz can have a shot at them, or provide some very, very light anti-air for the Spetsnaz. Also useful in forest fighting is the Sappery. It is not nearly as expensive as the VDV, but it can still deliver a pretty swift blow to the enemy. Make sure you don't pick the base Sappery, but the Sappery 85 with their RPOs. I'm not too big of a fan, because they don't have the staying power. They only have 5-man strength. I want to have Iglas in the deck, and I want to have Iglas ideally in a helicopter. Why? Well, the helicopter, especially with the Igla N, can be useful in tandem with Gornostrelki, which are hiding somewhere up here. These, make sure again you pick the Mi-8 MTV, or if you're going to go really expensive, the Mi-24D. This way you can create a quick strike force that captures buildings early on. The Mi-8 MTV can then suppress with rocket pods. The Igla ends make sure that any helicopters that fly by get killed off. And the Gornostrelki are capable of successfully engaging, well, at least lighter transports. Tanks, yes, they will do damage, but the problem is that the tank outranges them by 700 meters. So, yes, they will fire at them, but they have a severe problem with getting outspotted outranged. Sorry, not outspotted, but outranged. Conquerors M can go either way. You can use them as a booster to the Gornos. Alternatively, you can create a strike team of Igla, VDV, and Conquerors M. This way, you're making it a bit cheaper, but the Conquerors M do have the range that the other guys do not. Trade-off being, the Gornostrelki can fight against infantry if they have to. The Conquerors M really can't. And these guys carry 9 missiles, these guys carry 6. I would ideally have a card of these in a helicopter. This is going to be a drop-off helicopter, so an Mi-8T, the cheapest unit, can do. They already have a pretty good accuracy, 50%, so going with hardened, going with hardened is sufficient. Veteran's probably a bit much. Right, that is your infantry, your Spetsnaz. You could also go with a Spetsnaz Airborne unit. So Spetsnaz and the Mi-24A, or ideally the Mi-24D, but it is another 10 points more expensive. The beauty of this is that you can drop off Spetsnaz in a position that you really do not want enemy infantry in. Again, try to back them up with an Igla and a Gorno, otherwise they have no defense against anything that has a machine gun. Anything that has armor is going to be a massive problem. And now we have 2 more cards. We got the VDVs, we got Spetsnaz, NTR, Gorno. You could go with another card of NTR. It would just be the base Igla, which could, well, in the game that I showed, he could have dropped these off with the BTRD all over the forest. They would have been hell to deal with. They probably wouldn't live for very long because they're only 2-man strength. And they might not have shot down many aircraft, but any aircraft is a big boost. Strela 3, not a fan. Range is bad, accuracy is not nearly as good as the Igla. Aside from that, you got the worst ATGM, the Factoria. I generally just ignore that. And, well, another team of Conquerors could work if you want to set up more ambushes. Supports. You have a lot of infrared NTR there, sir. I would not bring the Strela 1M. Especially with the forest fighting in mind that he did. The Strela 1M would just die very quickly. The Grads, you could make them work in an airborne strategy. You could suppress an enemy with the BM-21s and then go at them with helicopters. That way you could ensure that you have the suppression effect already there before the helos arrive. The enemy units will be stunned, weakened, and therefore less effective. It's not something that I usually use. I'm much more of a fan of the Nonas. And actually the Nona SVK because they're motorized. These guys can move up much faster than the Nonas can. So for my taste, I would bring the Nona SVK. And then usually just 1 card. If you really want to go with a lot of mortars, bring 2 cards. But I generally don't find it necessary. Tanks. Just kind of skip over this. The BMP 685 does have good speed. Off-road, it does have amphibious capability, so it is an interesting instrument in your toolkit. PT-90 is most definitely not. These things have far worse off-road speed, they have worse amphibious, they have worse armor. If you want to bring something like this, which again could have been useful to kill VLRAs out in the field, bring the 685. But more importantly, you want to have the Jalo. Yes, I will go back to the reconnaissance section in a minute. I'm covering these because the Jalo and the 685, they're somewhat similar in the sense that they are both capable of firing at units from farther afield than most of your infantry can, with the exception of ATGM infantries and Gornostrelki. They have a good amount of accuracy. The Jalo is very fast, like the BMP 685, but fires faster, although it does slightly less damage. It's 9 AP versus 11, but then again, you don't really use these as tank killers unless you can get a flank shot on them. Armor is worse, amphibious capability is nice to have. Just make sure that you have one of the cards of Jalo because they are too good not to have. In a situation like this, I would say take 13 first. If that proves to be insufficient, then you can go back to trained and bring 18, but you will see them do slightly worse because they don't have the same accuracy. Reki. Oh, you really like your Spetsnaz VMF. I would bring these in AMI-24. No, actually, no. I'd bring these in the K-29. The AMI-24 is definitely potent, but they are another 15 points more expensive than the K-29. Just bring 4 at veteran. You don't need elite. They don't fight. They don't do morale recovery because they don't fight. They don't have a stun duration. Well, the stun duration reduction, because if they get hit, they're usually dead anyway. So just veteran, that's enough. Something I'm not seeing is cheap reconnaissance. Yes, you got the MI2, you got the K52. This is a must-have in this deck. A spotter team of a KA-52 with a KA-50 killer or an MI-28 killer is great. What I'm not seeing is this. For some reason, the Spetsnaz grew. Really good killing teams. And you can deploy them in different ways. You can deploy them in AMI-24D, again, in tandem, for example, with a Gornostrelki team. So the Gornostrelkis have more range. And then you would have a team of Gornostrelki, Spetsnaz GRU, and Igla. That way you have your anti-air covered by the Igla, you have your longer range anti-tank covered by the Gornostrelki, and these guys will cover the shorter range. They also got the Dragunov, so let's say the Gornos were able to take out an infantry transport and the infantry survived. You could then make sure that the infantry gets killed off early using the sniper rifle. So I'm very much in favor of having one of these. The transport method is up to you. Considering that I would want to have them in an aggressive deployment, I would probably pick the MI-24D, but it would make your strike teams pretty expensive. And you got the MI2. What I would really like is to get a slot available for the BRDM3. I think we can salvage a few points from the helos. Because interestingly, while Amorphous Zigzag has a ton of helicopters, the only helicopters that I think I saw were the Mi-4s. No. Not really. You got 1 Akula, we're going to make that 2. You got 8 Mi-24 VPs. That's a bit much. I would take 7 VPs. And then potentially 4... Well, actually, maybe the other way around. I would take 7 Ps and then 4 VPs. The difference between the VP and the P is the Cocon M. And you're going to see some noticeable results from this. Oh, actually, no, not that much. There's only 22 versus 20. I thought the difference here was greater. These are more tank killers. These are more supporting / gunships. I'm not even sure you would need the Mi-4A at all. I'm going to keep them in for now, but if I find that I need another slot, I will take them. And ideally, I would have another card or another point available here. So let's have a look at the ARP tab. Good grief. That's a lot of fighters. This is 2, 3, 4, 10 fighters. And during the gameplay, the fighters that he brought in were these, the MiG-23 MLs. If the skies are going to be yours, 2 Su-27 PUs would do it. If you're playing a 10v10, you're going to need a lot more of them. But in 4v4, an elite Su-27 PU is usually enough to start scaring away enemy aircraft, if not flat out killing them. You got the Su-24. That's your seed aircraft. You got the IL-102s. These are pretty good bombers, but slow. 750 kilometers an hour. That's usually what I don't like about them. Ideally, a MiG-29S. This thing does not have the same kind of payload. It has 4 bombs versus 14 from the IL-102, but it also has a couple of shorter range missiles. So if you want a bit more anti-air versatility, you can do that. Or you got their carpet bomber, the Su-24M. If you want to make sure that anything and everything dies in a forest, well, maybe with the exception of a tank, this will do it for you. It is faster than the IL-102. It is not nearly well as protected as the IL-102, but it will just carpet bomb infantry, allowing your infantry to push through a forest easier. So I would bring that over the IL-102. When it comes to tank snipers, you only got 2 of them. This is a very situational aircraft because of its, well, it eats missiles like nobody's business, but it is slow at 750. In the gameplay that I showed, the enemy had so little anti-air that it is possible that this thing would have an easy time to roam, up until the point where an enemy fighter shows up. If you are facing an armored unit, could be an M101HA for example, make sure that you have something else. Could be a MiG-27K, could be MiG-27M, could be a MiG-27 if you're feeling adventurous. I for one do like the fire and forget mode. I would just pick 2 of these. 2 MiG-27s, make sure that you wipe out those units. As for the Su-24, I usually pick the other guy. The, oh, it's a limitation, isn't it? No, it's not. The MiG-25. Oh, yeah, sorry, you have both. Right. That's a lot of seed. Yet, I haven't seen it in the game. I'm much more of a fan of the 25BM than I am of 24s. Reason being, shorter range. These things are faster, 50% ECM, and they got that 5.2 kilometer range missile. These things have a 4.5 kilometer range missile. They're slightly slower and they have less ECM. Difference is about half the price. That's an important distinction. I would say try to baby that MiG-25 and make sure it survives. That way you don't have to worry as much about anti-air. Just make sure it doesn't go out alone. Send this thing in and then have a PU back them up. MiG-31Ms and 31s are always an interesting discussion. Let's have that in the comments, whether these would be or would not be good units for this particular deck. With the gameplay in mind that is linked down below in the description, because that's what I'm basing all of this on. Cluster bombs from MiG-29M, meh. They're alright, but not always too easy to hit with. The beauty of the 29M as opposed to the 29S is that it can double up as a longer range fighter because it has 4 of those fire and forget Vimple missiles at 7.7 kilometers. So that's the trade. Now I liberated a few points here, and that is what I'm going to put into another reconnaissance units because I wanted the BRDM-3. These things, not necessarily good forest fighters, but they make an excellent defense for command vehicles. And they are capable of skirting around the edges, much like your, well, the rest of your airborne deck. Then we have another 2 points. Definitely not in tank tab, potentially in the vehicle section. BRDM Concours are interesting units. In the gameplay that we saw, they wouldn't have made that much sense. Neither would the Concours M really have made much sense. You could split it up between using, for example, another helo and another airplane. You could go with another infantry unit, another helo. In this case, I would say I want to bring another Concours M, just to ensure that I have a bit more ambush ability. Let's go with a cheap one there. And then we'll have one more helicopter. You got the Vs, the M28. Well, actually, no. I probably want a different plane. Because I got 2 fighters. I got my Seed. I got an anti-tank unit. I have another anti-tank unit. I got the bomber. Let's say that this is a bit of a wildcard point. You could adjust this as you see fit. You could go with the SU-25T if you're feeling like you need more anti-tank power, but with my additional Conqueror's card, I don't feel like I do. I would want to have a bit more anti-infantry capability. So in order to do that, bombing runs. Could be a Yak-38, could be a Yak-38 with napalm. Could be the IL-102 if you want to, but I'm going to go with the MiG-29S. Here you are, MiG-29S. This way I have a few more 500 kilogram bombs, and I have a couple of shorter range missiles to ensure that enemy units are going to be kept at range a bit more. So this is the deck that I would use on the map that you just saw. Not necessarily the best option, but this is what would probably work best for me. You can find it linked down below in the description. Just copy that, use the import function, and you can have this deck and you can try it out. Again, it's going to work decently well for me on tough jungle. If you're facing a different map, it probably will not work as well. You're going to have to employ it differently. Anyway, I hope you guys found this useful. If you did, please give the video a like. If you want to see the gameplay, click on the link down below in the description. You can get taken to the gameplay and my commentary on the use of Amorphous Zigzag's Airborne deck. And, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have suggestions, by all means, down below in the comment section. And I shall see you guys soon for more videos.